everyone to AI Africa Report. I know we're coming back after quite a while. The last time we did an interview was in July or August last year, 2019. And the scenario was much different than what it is now. I am Nazreen Ibrahim, the founder of AI Africa Report, which is an initiative from Socially Acceptable, a social tech enterprise based in South Africa, focused on the research and learnings around artificial intelligence and its impact on the continent, but also looking at it from the perspective of how it impacts people in their day-to-day lives and making sure that we always break it down so that it's easy to understand and learn for you. That's our mandate here. So the AI Africa Report aims to become the most comprehensive portal of knowledge and research in the African continent. One of our key focus areas for this year is AI ethics. However, we always continue to develop our communications framework for understanding AI in Africa, and that will go across multiple disciplines. But to refresh our focus on and discussions, we kick off today with a key player in the AI networking space and the sector in bringing people together. I know he doesn't want to be in the spotlight, but he's very much a media figure and someone who's a respected name in the South African space when it comes to AI. I'd love to introduce Nick Bradshaw. Dr. Nick Bradshaw is the founder of AI Expo Africa, a 25-year veteran of the tech industry, and has launched the AI Media Group in 2017, a new hybrid media consulting and events company offering clients insights into the growing 4IR opportunity in Africa. AI Media are also creators of Africa's largest B2B AI innovation and trade-focused community, AI Expo Africa, as I have said to you before, and Africa's first AI and data science magazine signups, and Africa's first dedicated AI-focused streaming channel, AI TV. So essentially, they're a bigger brother of ours. Nick, welcome to AI Africa Report. It's lovely to have you.
Thanks, Naz. Thanks for that introduction. It's quite long. I don't sometimes realize that those are all things we're actually working on. So thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. I'm so glad we chose to kick off with you particularly, considering that we're in a new time, a new normal, as they say. Coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic has really shifted things as we know it, life as we know it. So we speak, of course, we're speaking online, and we would have done this in studio. But it's interesting to know that our research and work into AI now will impact us in ways we haven't imagined yet. So I think to kick off that discussion, the first question should be, what prompted you to begin AI Expo Africa?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, really, the journey started for me. I've been in the tech industry for quite a long time, and I built a software business here in South Africa. It was mainly focused on the Microsoft platform, SharePoint, and we helped clients with that platform. And that company got acquired, and after that, I've always been genuinely interested in automation and how systems can help us. Obviously, part of that science fiction, and obviously, there's lots of things like Star Wars and Star Trek and all these other things. But actually, some of the technology that has been talked about for decades, is now realizing itself through the fact that we have greater computing power, and we have mobile phones now, which are like small computers, obviously, in our pockets. And some of the things which were hard to do even just some years ago are now possible. So I wanted to learn about that, and I went on a journey to start dipping my toe and in the learning and academic world. And I kind of struggled a little bit because I'm a generalist. I'm not a deep technical specialist. And what I realized in going on that learning journey, there was no business focused community. There was no real buyer, supplier, trade event. There was no kind of real world discussion that was going on around, hey, here's a product, you can buy it now. It can solve this problem for you, and this is how much it costs. So 2017, we set up AI Media, which is the company we run. And within that, we set up AI Expo Africa, which is the main event. And that also runs the magazine, and we also do some consulting as well. So essentially, the genesis came from the fact that there was nothing there before. And as an entrepreneur, that's an opportunity, right? So we set up the company and then started to build a community.
And setting up a community means that you've identified that particular area that hasn't had much interrogation or conversation yet. So in setting up the space, you're obviously in a prime position to answer this particular question, because your work over the last 3 years has been to concentrate people who are focused in the area, be they developers, data scientists, enthusiasts of AI, of which there are many, including policymakers, and to bring them together and give them a common place to have a voice. In doing that kind of work for the last couple of years, what would be your perspective of the current state of AI in South Africa and on the continent of Africa?
Well, I think the first observation is that, it's real. I mean, there's a lot of things happening. I break it down as what I call the economic pipeline. So at the one end of that pipeline, you have big companies like Microsoft and IBM and Google and Amazon. And at the other end of it, you've got a young learner who's just starting out. Maybe they're at school. And to them, maybe the fourth industrial revolution is just an aspiration. It's something that, they may never be able to get to enjoy or embark on a learning journey. So, but when you look at that spectrum, there is actually activity going on across not only South Africa, but the whole continent on that spectrum. So, there are initiatives which are focusing on young people and helping them embrace that opportunity. There's a huge amount of activity by the big companies launching new products all the time. I mean, even if you look at just Amazon and how they've changed and released their AI offerings within their own suite, that's radically changed even in the last 12 to 18 months. And then in between, you've got startups, you've got investors innovating with new technology and taking it to market. You've got more established mid-sized companies which are also either distributing existing products. So, like if you look at the RPA, robotic process automation, which has been broadly the initial jumping off point for most big companies to start looking at automation. You've got a very healthy ecosystem there of distributors and consulting partners working with those platforms. And I think once people have got into if you look at it from a business perspective, businesses are run on processes. So process automation is a logical starting point to embrace the fourth industrial revolution in quotes. And thereafter to then look at other aspects of the business. So things like data analytics, customer interfaces like chatbots, then point solutions which do a very specific thing, which maybe look at scanning documents or reading email, processing information in and out of an organization, translating text to speech to text to text. So that there's a lot going on. And I think really the last 3 years has seen people go on that journey from a business perspective, and there's a pretty healthy ecosystem. I think if you look at across the continent from a sort of innovation perspective, I mean, clearly South Africa has traditionally been a hotbed for innovation, but actually now you look at Nigeria, they're actually outgunning 4 countries in Africa in terms of the investment that's going into new tech, broadly fintech initially. But with other countries like Kenya, Egypt, Tunisia, Tanzania, we've had people from Burkina Faso, Senegal, Morocco contacting us. So the ecosystem is healthy. There's some fantastic initiatives going on, and from a business perspective, there's a market here, and it's pretty vibrant.
I think it's such a positive way to be able to frame the next coming months as we come out of lockdown restrictions, and interrogate or investigate better solutions to challenges we are currently facing. Because lockdown and the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic present their own kind of challenges. So what you're saying gives us hope and is very optimistic, because I like to hear that. It's always thought that the African voices around AI are particularly sometimes limited because of the interaction they can have internationally. But the way you framed it makes it such a positive place to begin, which I think is what you're bringing to this year's Expo. I know you have a theme every year for the Expo, and this year is no different. So what do you hope to look at, considering what we have just talked about and the timing that we're in? What do you want to have at this year's Expo? Wow,
that's a big question. I mean, I think if there was a word to describe the theme for this year's show, it'd be reinvention.
Reinvention, indeed.
And I think that's what everyone's having to do right now. I mean, I'm doing 6 and 7 Zoom calls a day. We've taken our event online. We're running an e-conference this year. So we felt in the previous 2 years that, we had a fairly good format. I mean, formats can obviously change and evolve, and I think we were always looking to do that. Whereas this year, obviously with COVID, we made a very early decision to take the event online. But this year, we're not doing like webinars, which I think a lot of people are kind of like a bit webinared out, if I'm honest. And we're not doing 3D goggles and virtual reality because that's logistically complicated and expensive. So what we're doing is we're using an e-conferencing platform, and it allows us to have an expo hall. It allows us to have a speaking program. It allows us to have an academic poster zone. There's a networking area, a speaker lounge. There's all the same components of our traditional show, but now it's online. So yeah, the theme is reinvention, and I think reinvention comes with innovation. And so I think we're using an existing platform. It's been around for 10 years, but just like Zoom, it's not something that people really use that much because we've all been used to working in a certain way. And I think we will see post-COVID some significant changes. I'm not talking wholesale change, but we will still see changes in perhaps how people commute and interact in an office environment. Maybe there'll be less of that. But the message from business has been, we want to carry on trading. We want to still network. We still want to tell people about our products and services. So hopefully this year, we'll reinvent ourselves, and it'll be a great experience.
You know what's so amazing about that particular theme is that reinvention generally is understood to be, some people may think it's something people do when they have a midlife crisis, which is not true. Or if they're reinventing going into witness protection, which is also not true. But reinvention generally with businesses is about what you say, which is about the actual idea of innovation and how to keep pushing a business offering forward, but keeping the customer at the top of mind, or ensuring that you deliver your service or product to the best of their ability. On the other side of that is it done in a fair, equitable space? And I think that's the conversation that people always try to get into, especially if you're talking about AI ethics, which makes me not think, but also realize that you've created a very inclusive and diverse space with AI Expo Africa. So it's almost self-explanatory, the question, but please tell our listeners and people who will watch this in the future, who should attend any AI Expo event this year or the years to come.
Yeah, well, thanks, Naz. I mean, it's a great opportunity to certainly have this platform to tell people a little bit more about the show. I mean, in the previous 2 versions of our show, we set ourselves a 6-year vision to deliver on what we want to achieve. So we're into that 3rd year. So we're sort of broadly coming almost halfway through that cycle. And when we've delivered the show, the idea was that we wanted to, obviously we have sponsors and they want to meet buyers and suppliers. Buyers and suppliers, that has been the key core to the show. But around the edge, and to drive that greater inclusivity, we also created free tickets for younger people to come to the event, so they could see what a business event was all about. And many of these events that you go to, the top end events are expensive. If you have to buy a ticket, typically your company pays for that. But if you're a young entrepreneur or you're a learner, that's obviously something that you can't do necessarily very easily unless you've got a sponsor. And I think the other thing was we wanted young people to come and also learn something, so that we created these workshops for them. The online platform for this year actually radically takes that to the next level. So last year, for example, we had a new feature called the Innovation Wall, which allowed people to present stuff from academia, which was relevant to industry, and that was a big success. This year, because we got the poster wall online, we can have poster submissions from all over Africa, and no one needs to be there. No one needs to fly anywhere to do their presentation. They can just sit on their laptop in Egypt or Senegal or Kenya or Tanzania, and someone can read their poster and they can ask a question. Equally, for the show this year, we've actually broken it into 2 shows. So we've got the main 2-day business show, which is broadly the live event, speakers, sponsors, delegates, networking, etc. And then we've got a 30-day archive of the show, which we can open up to universities, young people, students, learners, and they can come in and they can go and watch the talks, they can go to the vendor booths, they can interact with the posters, and we're going to make that a free ticketed option. So we can play to two different audiences this year, do it at a much bigger scale than we did last year. I mean, if we get the kind of numbers that we're thinking about over the whole event, then we could be in, 5, 10, maybe even 15,000 people coming through the show, which you could never do in a single location. It would be very logistically difficult to do that. Right. So I think, the appeal is broad, and the product that we're putting together is good enough, the business side is aimed at decision makers and analysts who are coming in looking for new technology, and then the archive of the show is really then aimed at a learning experience for young people to just come in and wander around and soak it up and take notes, and some of the vendors may even have a job button and you can apply for a job on their vendor booth. So we're trying to make it much more at a bigger scale this year. That's the key theme for this year.
And indeed, our online technologies and the different platforms that are getting better and better daily to host these type of events at the scale you're talking about is only increasing, which is great for us, because you're then able to explore your mandate of inclusivity so much better, which I think is our focus, particularly my focus with AI ethics and the conversation we just had around how inclusive AI technology can be, because AI itself is a particular type of technology, but there are ways in order to implement it. And the implementation is what gives rise to particular solutions for food security, for health solutions, for finance with fintech. So there are particular areas in the African continent that have certain challenges that we don't have compared to developed economies, and then people who are looking at AI as a way to be able to address them. That can be problematic if there are some factors that will affect the rapid deployment across the continent. What for you, in your experience, has been the top 3 that you've noticed in your research and observation that affects the rapid deployment of these technologies across the continent?
I think the first one, because we're broadly a business, real world focused community, the biggest barrier to adoption is really the willingness of a company to actually change. Because essentially AI technologies or AI software-based systems or systems that use a component of AI are essentially just technology sitting in a box or sitting on a server, wherever or however it's deployed. But for the business to embrace it and get the value from it, the technology is actually the least important part of the successful change program that it's there to support. So whilst the technology is important in terms of it underpins the change to the business process, for example, that change program has to have a vision. It has to have a leader. They need to think about training. They need to think about people. They need to think about the processes themselves. They need to think about the impact on the customers. How will this change how we interact with our supply chain, for example? How do we interact with our customers? And then within that strategy and vision for the change, you have to then consider things like data, privacy, ethics. We've done some research on whether people are including ethics or even need to include ethics in some of the change programs that they're engaged in. The vast majority of people obviously say they do, and there's almost a 50-50 split on whether they're developing their own ethics framework internally or they're using a consultant to help them do that. So I think the first factor is the willingness of the business to change, and then secondly, their ability and maturity to manage that change. Because some companies can manage change very well. Some companies, unfortunately, manage change very badly. And the bad change programs typically blame the technology. They say, oh, it's too complex. We wanted to change the features and the functionality. But often most technology change programs fail because of people and process readiness. The organization's not ready or capable to actually even embark on the change program because they haven't got the competency to do it. And you hear those.
That can vary from country to country on the continent, which is also then impacted by things like economic stability, political stability as well, and infrastructure availability. Would that be correct?
Well, I mean, look at today. I mean, even electricity stability. I mean,
Absolutely.
Look, I mean, I think if you have to sort of draw a benchmark and say, look, infrastructure and connectivity and the basics of electricity, they have to be a given. This technology broadly works on an infrastructure that needs to be stable and it needs to have power. But I mean, continentally, most large businesses which are embracing this technology have offices around the continent, and their change programs typically led from one of those offices.
Right.
So, I mean, I still think, yes, clearly some countries on the continent don't have as mature an infrastructure as, say, we do here in South Africa, or I mean, obviously Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, Tunisia. There's some big tech hubs in those places as well, and people are embracing it. So I think because I come at it from a business perspective, I think those are the top factors which are contributing to adoption. I think there's a willingness to look at it across the board. And I think once you start getting into some of the more contentious use cases, like some of the ones we've touched on before, like social scoring, law, crime and law enforcement, things like facial recognition, then you're moving into an area, that you could loosely associate that with maybe smart city or safe city kind of technologies. And maybe some of those use cases are very, very positive. If you can automatically detect a fight breaking out in a street, that might be a very useful use case. But then if you're scanning faces and then you say, well, this person is a suspect and they're not, then that's clearly a much more contentious use case, which needs to be much more thoroughly thought through, and the ethics and the privacy and everything and the data protection that goes with that has to be solid. Otherwise, as we've seen in the news this year, these technologies are getting pulled, and the data behind them has perhaps been shown to be lacking. So I think willingness is probably the third factor that either inhibits or promotes adoption.
It's a nice way to end our conversation. You've wrapped up that particular discussion point, touching on ethics particularly. Do you think, Nick, as a wrap up to what I am sure are going to be the first of many conversations to come with AI Africa Report, do you think that enough is being done around AI ethics on the continent itself and in South Africa?
I mean, if you look at the national level, I mean, there's a very interesting study that was done by, I think, Oxford Insights, which looks at the global government readiness to embrace artificial intelligence. I think at the national level, many countries still have a long way to go in terms of maturing their strategy. There's a lot of activity going on right now. I think Kenya last year was one of the first countries to publish a concrete national strategy around AI and blockchain, for example. So, and obviously within that, there are, and I'm not going to quote the report off the top of my head, but clearly the data and integrity and the ethics and the privacy, etc., around that has to be solid. I mean, I come from a process change maturity background, and I mean, there's some very mature frameworks out there for maturing technology competency and capability in a business context. So you've got things like CMMI, you've got COBIT, ITIL. These are frameworks that have been around for a very long time. And I think there is some emerging standards work that is starting to come out now. I think the EU are doing some interesting work there. I think the World Economic Forum and some of the work that Kay Firth Butterfield has been doing. She's a keynote speaker at our event. A toolkit. But I think it would be interesting to see if a similar kind of framework like CMMI or COBIT or a structured framework like that emerges, which can then serve as a kind of maturity framework for you to work your way up to get to level 5 maturity using these technologies. I mean, a lot of the frameworks, the technology is only one part of the framework. So again, we have to remember that really AI is sitting as a technology component in a system. And what we're trying to do is mature the competency and the processes which allow us to use that system
Absolutely.
to affect whatever change we're trying to do in the business, for example. So I think that would be an interesting space, I think, over the next 5 years to see what work comes out there. There are standards coming out. I know the ITU are looking at telecom standards which are using AI systems. And I met one of the consultants from one of the consulting companies last year at the AI for Good Global Summit, and there were some interesting frameworks being discussed there. So I think, look, we're at very early stages of some of the evolution of these standards, and I think ethics will be a component, which has to be a component of them.
Okay, wonderful. We'll explore more of the ethics side in another conversation, and also catch up with you on how the progress and preparations for the AI Expo Africa is coming up. Before we go, please tell us quickly where people can register for AI Expo Africa this year and some of the details.
Yeah, just go to www.aiexpoafrica.com, and there's a link there you can register, and it takes you to our Quicket ticket site, and you can buy tickets there. And the website obviously tells you a lot more about the event and what we're trying to achieve this year. And in the next 7 weeks, it's going to rapidly change with a whole load of new sponsors which are coming on board, and we're just announcing the next tranche of speakers. So yeah, good time to log on, and hopefully you can join us this year.
It's going to be wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to it. Nick, thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon. Good luck with AI Expo Africa.
Thanks very much, Naz. It's been great to join
Brilliant.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was a great conversation today. Nick wrapped up with what AI ethics could potentially mean and what's being done so far, with a particular focus on the African continent. We will be sure to be having more of these conversations in the coming weeks and months, and going on as we build the AI Africa report into becoming the most comprehensive portal of knowledge and research for AI on the African continent. Coming up next week, we've got Yashmita Bana. She's CEO at Nika Technology Group, which is an award-winning company. Their tagline says, bringing EQ into AI. So I'm really looking forward to that. For the AI Africa report, I'm Nazreen Ibrahim. See you next week.